Funny what I can hear from stage from a distance. Can I ask us to wrap up? Thank you. I can confirm that we do have DM in the building. He's not in the room yet, so we want to make sure that we get through this part so that we give him an opportunity to be able to address us. So for this last panel, we will be having 5 different speakers in the form of a moderator. Then we have 2 speakers that are joining us virtually and 2 respondents. Our moderator will be Prof. Mark Swilling, Academic Lead for SA Tide Workstream on Water, Energy and Food in the context of climate change, Stellenbosch University. Our speakers that will be presenting to us, the first will be speaking on macroeconomic modeling tools, will be Prof. Antoine Godin, Head of Macroeconomic Modeling Unit, Agence Français de Développement Afrique du Sud. Then we'll have South Africa Energy Policy and Energy Modeling and Scenario Analysis. That will be Mr. Bruno Mervin, Senior Researcher, Energy Research Centre, University of Cape Town. Now our 2 respondents. The first will be Dr. Adele Bosch, Senior Economist in the Office of the Chief Economist, Development Bank of Southern Africa, fondly known as DBSA. And the second respondent is Prof. Heinrich Bollmann, Associate Professor, Department of Economics for the University of Pretoria. We have asked all of them to keep within a certain time frame so that you can ask them some of those questions that are academic and related to your various industries. So we will keep time closely. Please help me welcome on stage the ones here physically. Prof. Mark Swilling, Dr. Adele Bosch, and Prof. Heinrich Bollmann. On virtually we'll be having Prof. Godin and Mr. Mervin. Thank you. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks very much. It's my job to introduce you to the world of the modelers. And I start off with confessions of a non-modeler. And those confessions are the following. When you think about modeling, and I'm not going to ask those of you to put up your hands who've done any modeling, there's often 3 different kinds of responses. And here I'm drawing from a comment that one of Bruno's colleagues made a few days ago, Andrew Marquardt. The one response to modelers is those people who say, it's all irrelevant. It's all got nothing to do with the real world. Then the opposite of that is those who think modeling generates all the possible answers we need, and without them, we are sunk and confused. And the third are the pragmatists who essentially believe they have some use, but won't swear by them. And the often used phrase for that is, all models are wrong, some are useful. Why? Where does that phrase come from, and why does it make sense? Well, in some ways, as a good scientist, I should also confess, not only are all models wrong, but all theories are wrong. Which is why we as scientists must always be open to the possibility that there will be evidence that's going to prove us wrong. In the meantime, we insist that we might be right. So the phrase, all models are wrong, some are useful, is fairly appropriate to what science is about. But why? Why has modeling emerged? Well, no matter what you think of modeling, whichever position you might be in, you are surrounded by modelers. Every aspect of everyday life now, from global climate change, and we started this whole event with modelers after the dignitaries spoke, when Francois spoke to us, everything to national economic policy frameworks, down to the business plans of every viable business, and even the apps that you click, are all driven by models. Now, why has this happened? How do we explain this? Well, the simple answer is, as society has become more and more complex, we need tools to make sense of our place in the world. That's what defines us as human. We like to live in imaginary spaces that in some ways help us to cope with the challenges of the life and the world we live in. And there's two things that have emerged that we've evolved to cope with this complexity. One is complexity theory itself. 25 years ago, I could not make this statement. Complexity theory now is the dominant conceptual framework in virtually every social science and natural science discipline. Somebody did a recent audit. It's 50 disciplines, but it's a lot more than that. So complexity theory is what we are now taught at universities, and it's the way we conceptualize the world. But what is less known is the second instrument, which is algorithms. Algorithms is what computerized modeling enables. And as our computer power has evolved and got more substantial, so our algorithms have become more complex, and so we are able to claim to know more, whereas in actual fact, we need to be a little bit humbler about that. But what is an algorithm? One could argue that algebraic mathematics underpinned traditional economics. 1 + 1 = 2 is a relationship between nouns, between things. One is a thing, one is a thing, two is the sum of the two. But when it comes to understanding a complex world, nouns are not that useful. Quantities are not useful enough. Those are quantities. What we need is verbs. What we need is qualities. What we need is actions, processes, and relations. And that is what has given rise to algorithmic mathematics, the mathematics of the relationships between the parts that gets embodied in our models. And so an algorithm is if this, if that, if not that, therefore possibly this. What then? These are relational questions. This is what underpins the models and the world, the world of the modelers, and the power of the modelers to shape our world, which is something we might not feel totally comfortable about. So who I'm going to introduce, well, they've been introduced. I have the pleasure of introducing to you 4 amazing people who I work with quite closely in various ways through SA Tide initiative. And in many ways, they're going to try and tell you the story. I suppose at the essence of what a model is, it's an explanatory story. So listen to what is going to be presented as a set of explanatory stories which have got different emphases. Because the thing about algebraic mathematics, you can leave out an important relation. And one of the important relations that is missing from our computerized general equilibrium models, which is the dominant way of modeling economies, is finance and climate damage factors. And that's partly what we are wrestling with inside the SA Tide, is how to build a hybrid model, a hybrid non-equilibrium model, which Antoine is going to talk about, that the AFD has been developing for quite some time, that tries to include that. Bruno is going to be talking about the most influential modeling work in the South African context that many different players, including the DMRE, relies upon. So you're going to meet the jockey behind the model that has a very substantial influence on how we understand our energy transition. So let me start off with Antoine. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me quite well. And it's a pleasure to be here virtually. I wish I was with you guys, but unfortunately I had to stay in Paris. Too bad for me. And thank you so much for having me in this distinguished audience. It's a real pleasure. So what I will be doing today is, following on what Mark has been presenting, is trying to understand how models can be used to be transformative. Because what we are facing right now is the fact that it's been 50 years that we heard the concept of limits to growth, 35 years that we've heard the concept of sustainable development, 15 years that we have been talking about planetary boundaries, and yet we haven't been able to meet what we want to do, which is a just ecological transition. We know that we have to think about ecological, social, economic, financial aspects, as Mark was just saying, and yet we are not there yet. And so the question is, can model be transformative and help us in delivering the promises of sustainable development or just transition, and not be just operators of neutralization of conflicts? And this is why the AFD has been working on this idea of strong sustainability, which is not what we didn't invent the concept. The concept emerges in the aftermath of the limits to growth model of Meadows, and it's just the idea that a priori we cannot substitute different types of capital. We cannot substitute natural capital by human capital or by economic capital, because there are biophysical underpinnings of what we are trying to do. And so a priori, we should refute that. Sometimes technology will help us in substituting types of capital, but it's only when it's proven. And so a priori, we should refuse that. And as soon as we accept this, then we fall into what we call multidimensionality, the fact that we have to have transdisciplinary approach, multidimensional dimension in terms of geography, in terms of time, and we have to highlight the tensions and synergies that may exist between the different types of sustainability, economic, ecologic, or social sustainability. And so the third guiding principle that we are putting forward is not only do we need non-sustainability and multidimensionality, but also we have to recognize the fact that these dimensions, these dynamics, are the outcome of a social construct. And so it is important that we construct a governance structure that is adequate for the transition that we want to achieve, both in terms of the destination and on the path towards the destination. And so it's fundamental to have this public policy dialogue between scientists and policymakers to ensure that there is a constant discussion to highlight the tension, to highlight the synergies, and to make sure that where we want to go and how we go there has the adequate governance structure. And that's in this context that I'm talking, and I will be showing 4 different ways in which we can use models to construct different types of dialogues and to ensure that public policy dialogue is transformative and that models can help in that direction. The first one is, how do we create a common language across different types of modeling, and especially when it comes to biodiversity, which is extremely complex. And I will show you how we can do this very simply with a very simple but explicit modeling exercise. Then I will talk about how we can construct more complex model, system dynamics model, which is what we are currently developing in the context of SA Tide, and how we can use them in participatory scenario building. The third point I'll show is about uncertainty and robust decision making. What is important is that economics have to move away from optimizing something which is extremely uncertain and just design policies that are robust, that deliver on their premises, no matter what happens in the rest of the world, in what we don't know. And the fourth one is a very simple, very short presentation of different types of model, which is strategic macroeconomic games that we just tested in Colombia. And I just want to give you a primer on this because I think it's a different way. It's not quantitative modeling, it's qualitative modeling, but it's very interesting. And I think I just thought it would be a nice conclusion. All right, so the first example I want to give you is how can we construct a common language across something which is very difficult to present, which is biodiversity. And what we did here is a study we conducted with SANBI and the FFE is to just connect data sets and connect different types of data sets from biophysical data sets and social data sets with economic data sets and with socioeconomic data sets. And by just connecting these data sets, we are able to see how different sectors, these are the x-axis, the different sectors in the South African economy, where you have agriculture here, mining sectors, industrial sectors, and then service sectors are connected to the 21 ecosystem services. And that shows how much they depend on the availability of water, on climate regulation, on water quality, and so on and so forth. And the redder, the more dependent you are, and the bluer, the less dependent you are. And you see that you have a lot of sectors that are dependent to ecosystem services. And then we combine this data set with the probability of having water shortage in specific municipalities in South Africa, and what is the share of value added in these municipalities that are dependent on water. And so the fundamental question is, for a biodiversity risk to emerge, for the consequences of water shortage, is you have to have two conditions. One, you need to have water shortage risk emerging. Two, you need to have economic activities that are dependent on water. If you don't have the two, then there is no risk. There's maybe, and there's no vulnerability. And so when we combine this information, then we can look at what would be the consequences if there is water shortage. So for example, we see that there's 10% of, 40% of the production that is produced in sectors that are dependent on water shortage, but there's only 10% of it which is located in municipalities where there is a water risk. And that allows us then to highlight where should we look, which municipalities are the most important to protect production, to protect profits or wages, or to protect exports. And that's the worrying side for South Africa, is the fact that net exports, more than 20% of net exports, are located in municipalities where there is a water shortage risk. So that means 20% of the South African exports are vulnerable to water shortage. We can go even further by connecting this with socioeconomic data sets such as the employment, and we can look at the kind of jobs that are at risk, either in terms of income structure or in terms of skill structure. And we see that depending on the sectors and depending on the location, we have different types of vulnerabilities for the people. Either you're going to have poor people that are going to be impacted and low skill, or you might have high skill and high income. And you see here, the model is extremely simple. It's just saying there's biophysical situation, you have a connection between the biophysical connection and the production structure, and then you can say, okay, if you fail to produce in these sectors, what are the socioeconomic consequences in terms of exports, in terms of employment, and so on and so forth. And that allows us to start a dialogue between ecologists, economists, policymakers. The second example is what Mark was presenting, is this idea of having a system dynamics model which incorporates finance and that understands how financial and real dynamics are interconnected. And so the GEM approach that we have developed at the AFD is really to try to understand how small open economies in a financial world are impacted by the dynamics, domestic or international. And so this is why we construct these models. I'm going to be quick on the methodological framework, but we can discuss afterwards. It's important to have a strong accounting structure. This is what we call the stock flow consistency. And that we have explicit feedback loops between stocks and flow in economic and financial terms, but also in biophysical aspects. We work with disequilibrium dynamics. That implies that whenever you have a disequilibrium, you have both quantity and price response, and it's the interactions between the two that are going to explain the complex dynamics that emerges out of this. And as I said, the importance of money and the importance of finance, because the decision to finance and the decision to do an entrepreneurial investment are not made by the same people. And it's the interactions between who decides to finance and who decides to invest that are going to lead to the overall dynamics. And we applied this in the case of Colombia, for example, trying to understand what happens if Colombia starts losing its oil and coal exports. And just as a reminder, Colombia oil and coal exports are 40% of the exports, which is very different from the case of South Africa. And based on these predictions in biophysical terms, so in the millions of barrels of oil and in the quantity of the tons of coal that we can export, we designed two scenarios in constant dollars, in current dollars. And what are the consequences for Colombia in using our model is, first of all, it will lead to a collapse of the economy in terms of growth, in terms of depreciation of the currency, in terms of higher deficit, also because the coal sector is generating a lot of dividends, and so on and so forth. So you have a massive a crisis going on in the economy, and one of the indicators we are using here is the per capita income in USD. That's very important because Colombia is importing a lot of products. So if the per capita income in dollars is going down, that implies that you don't have access to complex goods such as computers, cars, but also health and so on and so forth. So you have, in the case of a global transition, 20 years of crisis in Colombia before the economy recovers. And we have shown that in certain cases, it is possible to have a currency crisis where the economy goes to a complete collapse on the balance of payment and on the domestic dynamics. So the policy message that we draw, and we were working with the Ministry of Finance in Colombia, was that we need to reindustrialize the economy, do export diversification, and global value chain integration. But it takes time, so we need to start as soon as possible. We did the same exercise now in the case of climate change and how hydric stress can generate macro-financial instabilities in Tunisia by using crop models. So we have the different types of crops here, and then we feed that into the model and look at what are the consequences in the trade deficit, but also the adaptation measures and how this will impact debt and deficit for the government. And again, we can show that the climate change is having a negative impact on Tunisia, which is exacerbated if the rest of the world is also having the same kind of damages, which feed into the trade story by having higher food products, which is something which is very likely to happen, in which case not only will Tunisia have to import more, but it's going to be more costly, which is going to exacerbate further the trade deficit. That will create tension on the external debt and on the government balances and will increase country risk. You can do that by you can respond to that by having adaptation measures and by having different climate and damage loss funds that can help Tunisia in overcoming these kind of dynamics. The last example I want to show in these system dynamics is how energy can have a participatory sector scenarios. Here it's the case of Morocco, where for each of the 7 sectors I'm showing here, we have built scenarios of deep decarbonization, so net zero trajectories. And for each of these scenarios, we are then trying to understand what kind of financial instruments can we use to overcome the investment that is required to decarbonize. And we couple the LEAD model, which is the energy model, with the GEM model by having a convergence. And so the models are interacting with each other until you converge. And that allows us to see, okay, if the households are investing so much and we are using these kind of financial instruments, or if the private sector or if the municipalities are investing so much, then the consequence is that they will use less energy. And as a consequence, you can have then different types of outcome in terms of GDP, trade deficit, import propensities, debt, public deficit, and savings by the households. So here we are, again, what is interesting is not only the system dynamics, but also the fact, yes?
5 minutes.
Yes, yeah, I will finish in 5 minutes, no worries, I'm almost done. So what is interesting in this story here is that by building these scenarios, by looking at specific sectors and by specific technologies, we are able to identify where do we need specific financial instruments and what would be the consequences of using these financial instruments on the macroeconomic dynamics of Morocco. And what we show is that in principle, the low carbon transition in Morocco is beneficial for the GDP, but you can have different repercussion in terms of financial indebtedness for the firms, or for the public sector, or for the households. Last example I want to give you is, can we design robust policies? And we have a lot of uncertainty. So what I'm showing here is that there are thousands of different possibilities in terms of the different outcomes that are coming from what we cannot control, rest of the world dynamics, how much financial flows are coming to the economy. So what we do is we simulate thousands of simulations with the model, and then we look at systematically how the different policies that we can think of are leading to specific outcome, and see whether certain policies are better, are more robust to the uncertainty of the world to deliver on the promises of sustainability in terms of economic or ecological ones. And that's what we can do here, and we can go deeper in this. But I think it's fundamental, and it's very important to understand that the goal of economics is not to maximize something which is very uncertain. The goal of economics is to guarantee that you achieve what you want to achieve, even though you have uncertainty about other parameters. Let me finish with the games. Why do we use games? Well, I think it's important that if you think about how decision makers are deciding, is they have a mental model and they combine it with some narrative, and that gives them a decision. The problem is that we have different mental models. So even if we have the same narrative, the mental models are different, which leads to different decisions. And so the goal of the game is to start to have first agreeing on a common mental model, and by combining the different interactions, by playing different roles, to understand that there's not one mental model, there's many different mental models, and hence the coordination of different actors is very different. And this is what we have been doing in Colombia, where we played literally the macroeconomic games, where people are playing either a household or a firm or a government, and by playing different roles, they understand the complexity of what it is to do an energy transition in the case of Colombia. So let me conclude here. Can models be transformative? Yes, they can, but they require transdisciplinary collaboration, and it implies that we have to build a common language between economists, ecologists, policymakers, financial experts, and so on and so forth, and that we have to understand that there are what we call double materiality, the fact that the economic system is impacting the biodiversity, but also biodiversity is creating dependency onto the economy. We have to talk about opportunities and vulnerabilities, and we have to make sure that we are building robust policies. And finally, different types of models are useful for different purposes and different types of dialogues. And we should keep that in mind, that the goal of a model is to help policy making, is not to give a final answer to a question. I thank you here, and I'm looking forward for the discussion afterwards.
Thanks, Antoine, for that tour de force. Bruno? Can we get Bruno online?
Hi, I'm here. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can. We can see you. Just screen version, that's it. Yeah, that looks good.
Cool. Thank you, Mark, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting us to the symposium. And like Antoine, I'm sorry that I couldn't make it in person. It's quite hard to speak now after Antoine, who's given us kind of a broad, very well tour of various models applied across a range of different questions. So I'll be focusing on one aspect, trying to connect with what he's presented. It's probably closest to the Moroccan case, where he's linked an economic model to an energy model. I'll be talking about the model that's been developed and maintained at our group, in the Energy Systems Research Group at the University of Cape Town, called SATM-GE. So in the universe of models trying to help answer questions around, to help us with the climate transition challenges. There's mainly three types of models that we find. There's ones, IAMs, global assessment models, integrated assessment models that try and account for the whole picture at a global scale, but lacking detail at the national scale. And then you have national scale models, such as some of the ones that Antoine touched on, that will be focusing on the economic damages and the policy responses to that. And then the third type, which is climate and energy economic models that are focused on the mitigation aspect. And that's the area that our model is kind of focused on, and we are able to answer questions around that. The typical sort of questions that we're asking around problem mitigation is, what should I next NDC is, what can we commit to for 2035, what's the quantum of investment that's required if we want to increase ambition, can we get to net zero by 2050, what cost, what's the impact of increasing ambition on household consumption, what are benefits of encouraging local content in the supply of RE equipment, what sort of transition risks are we facing, which sectors, firms are at risk if we transition too fast or if we drag our feet. It's kind of questions we're trying to answer with the help of this type of model that I'll be talking about. So zooming in from the broad universe of all models to the ones that will focus on energy economic models, there's models with three strengths. There's technical detail model, often referred to as bottom-up models. So the SATM energy model is that. The RP model is an example of that. And then we have general equilibrium model, which focus on the equilibrium feedbacks. And then we have time series models. Perhaps Antoine's model would be, I'm not sure, maybe on this aspect, but also a little bit on the, although he doesn't like to use equilibrium for his model. So the models would normally focus, there might be other axes, but these are kind of the main normally axis of strength where models would be good at in one of those. And ideally we want a model that's good at everything, but there's trade-offs. So what we've been working on is trying to kind of benefit from strengths along two axes, which is drawing from the strength of CG models and engineering model, bottom-up models. So we've combined two models with those strengths. So an engineering model called SATM, it's a times model, optimization model. It's technology rich, so it's similar to the LEAP model that Antoine would have used in Morocco, except that we also have an optimization feature, which is now available in LEAP. It might not have been when Antoine was doing its analysis, it was quite new. And SATM we've included, so it represents the energy sector, which is from a GHG inventory, the most important emitting part of the component of the economy. So we've got a lot of detail on the energy sector, including the power, refineries, and on the demand side, transport, industry, and households, how they use energy. We've augmented, as part of the optimization, the industrial process emissions. And then we've tagged on two spreadsheet models on waste and affolly, which gives us accounting framework for the full inventory of the national system. And on that, we have an optimizing feature, so we can kind of quickly generate different trajectories giving a particular constraint on our emissions, whether we want to reach the net zero goal or cumulative, or a particular trajectory for GHG emissions, given a particular growth trajectory. The growth trajectory is exogenous. We have to specify, because it's a partial equilibrium model, we have to get it from somewhere. So we draw it from a CG model, provides us an internally consistent projection of what the economy could like given certain conditions. But some of those conditions would be things like energy system in transition, so it has to come from somewhere, so that's convenient. We can get that from the energy model. And so we combine both models. The energy model can give us things like emissions, investment requirements, energy prices, what sort of mix of technologies, so types of power plants we'll have and vehicles we'll have in our system to meet a certain climate goal, not climate goal, emission trajectory. But it can't say anything about socioeconomic indicators, which are needed in order to have this discussion with the policymakers, because that's the language that they're using. So by attaching the CG lens and making both consistent, we are able to draw on those indicators and open the conversation up between our kind of energy planners and policymakers. So that's the overview of SATM-G. So just to drill down a little bit on both models and how they're linked before going on some examples. So the corner piece of the energy model is the energy balance. So we've augmented it from just an electricity model that you have for the RP, and we've now added a demand. So the electricity demand is endogenous electricity demand, which is endogenous to the model. We give the model demands for process heats, heating and cooling in households, how many passenger vehicle kilometers, 10 kilometers we need to transport given a certain assumed economic trajectory, and from there we find the mix over the modeling horizon. So this is the 2017 energy balance showing the flows, where they're coming from and where they're going, and in 2050 given a certain emission trajectory. And because most of our emissions are associated with those energy flows, once we've got a good handle on the energy flows, we've got a good handle on the associated emissions for the energy sector. So we have quite a lot of detail on sectors that are hard to decarbonize, such as cement, steel, transport, and households and buildings. So the detail is sectoral, but also temporal. Here it's showing the profile estimates that we have for different end uses for a typical day in summer and in winter. That we try and capture with the model. It's important to have the temporal side aspect covered in the residential sector because that's driving our peak demand, which we need to be able to cover. Then we have a fairly detailed representation of the power sector, which has to supply and meet this demand. And the optimization is solved as one big linear program, so we're solving across the demand side and the supply side in one go. And we use a discount rate to weight across the different years. The optimization is convenient in the sense that we are able to, the model can respond endogenously to a whole range of different conditions or assumptions around prices and demand levels and constraints. So that's kind of a zoom in on the energy model. Then looking at the CG plot, the economic model. So as the energy balance is the cornerstone of the energy model, the social accounting matrix is the corner piece of the economic model. The social accounting matrix describes flows throughout the economy. It includes flows, forward and backward linkages between the economic sectors. So which sector is buying from is reliant on which sector. And also we have flows between the economic activities, the firms, to households, and we also have a trade component covered. So this table on the bottom right corner is just kind of showing a summarized view of the SAM, and on the left it's kind of a picture, a Sankey view of the flows of part of the SAM, just showing the flows at the between firms and households. So we have in the CG we have a detailed SAM, and we have some equations that allow us to rebalance the SAM given certain shocks. So the strengths of and weaknesses, I won't harp on that. Heinrich will probably provide more details there. The main ones for CG is the theoretical framework of the accounting framework, which ensures we have covered the relations between the different sectors. It allows for the complexity that we can capture, allows for quite rich analysis and allows different trade-offs. It's quite a flexible framework. The difficulties are calibration problem. We're missing detail on the financial flows, as Mark mentioned in his introduction. So just like the energy optimization models and the CG models are not forecasting tools. Yeah,
Bruno, can you have 5 more minutes?
Yeah, sure. They allow us to describe internally consistent pictures of what the future could look like under different conditions and explore a whole range of different scenarios. So the version that there have been a whole range of developments of ESAGE, the CG model, which is based off a standard IFRI model, and we're using this particular one here called ESAGE, which is where we've aligned up the energy balance to the SAM, in such that both models have the same energy flows and energy units, given certain prices. And it's a dynamic recursive version. There's a version. There's also an extension which is used in Sacred to look at climate impacts. We haven't merged our version with that one yet. So this is just showing how we link the two models. We're passing information from the energy model to describe the production function of the CG model. And we do that both on supply and demand sectors, such that at the end of the day we have agreement between two models. This is showing time series for energy, different energy commodities in the x-axis for the different sectors in the y-axis between the two models in blue and orange. So once the two models have agreement on energy flows, we have good agreement on the GHG associated with the systems from the two models. And from there, we have confidence to explore some questions around energy and climate policy. So one of the things that we have explored was a net zero by 2050, 2055. It was funded by UKPAC for PCC, which we finished earlier this year. We're just waiting for final sign-off before we publish it. And we kind of look at a range of scenarios of reaching net zero for South Africa between 2050 and 2055 under different assumptions for global cumulative emissions. These graphs showing kind of to reach the last mile requires quite a lot of effort to reach the last mile. We can do 10 gigatons with almost no cost to the economy, but not reaching net zero. When you have to start reaching net zero, we find that in the last mile we start to hurt the economy. This is assuming a simple finance model, that the financial resources available are the same in the reference as they would be in the more ambitious scenarios. We've done some preliminary experiments where we relaxed this assumption around finance, and we can find that we can reduce some of those negative impacts of increasing ambition. And we've done also some very preliminary playing around with CBAMs. The CG provides, because we have the full input-output table and it's dynamically updated up to 2050, so we can provide the carbon content of all our goods that we export for every year, and that allows us to put on CBAM by assuming some responsiveness to that, to the price differentials between our domestic and global prices with and without the CBAM. We can test some possible impacts on that. We've also done some experiments playing around on effects of localization and the positive effect it would have despite having to pay some premiums on that. So the overall insights for me mainly as a modeler is that it's very exciting to do work that is policy relevant, but also hard to balance time and effort, being at the frontier of both technical work and being responsive to policy questions as they arise. You need to have the policy experts and modelers in the same team, which we're lucky to have in our team, where we have kind of a bit of both working together. And we need to be able to zoom in. The policy experts need to be independently able to zoom in and out to gain trust in the model, to be able to see the detail as well as the bigger picture easily, and be able to move from one to the other easily. So as a modeler, you need to work to make that accessible. As a modeler and working in collaboration with us, so we need to push the bar, make our models more complicated and bigger, and we don't want to reinvent it or rebuild from scratch every time we need to do a new NDC update. So we want to build systems that you can maintain and update without having to reinvent the wheel every time. So using tools such as version control is definitely like a must if you're going to attempt to do anything that's sustainable from a modeling point of view. We need to keep pushing the boundaries to increase the model resolution, being cognizant of the trade-offs. So the larger models are harder to maintain, take longer to run and debug, harder to document, and also combining models. Having everything in one super model is convenient, but concentrates model power, so you only have you reduce the number of people that can use it. More models are less convenient, but it distributes model power, and it's perhaps easier to integrate larger teams of people and have more eyes on model and what's moving and what's not working, what's strange. And then having multiple models kind of trying to answer the same is good for kind of cross-checking and trying to understand when you're not getting the same answer. Yeah, so there's a lot of work needed.
Can we end here, Bruno?
This is the history of the, and some reading stuff. That's what I had. Thanks. That's the team.
Okay. We're now going to move into a discussion. We're going to kick off with 5-minute comments from Adele, starting off with Adele and then moving to Heinrich. So over to you, and then I will moderate some some conversation based on that.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Antoine and Bruno, for the discussion and for the presentation. So basically, was asked to cover how we are thinking around the hybrid model in South Africa. So we were a team from DBSA, working together with AFD, as well as UCT, the PCC, and CST. So we're quite a big team of economists and modelers trying to replicate and to some extent the Columbia model in South Africa to see how we can then test the scenarios, especially focusing on water, food, and the energy nexus in the context of climate change. So we are at the moment still collecting data, and I want to get back to what Prof. Swilling said before. It's not the models, it's the data. That's very important. And sometimes we even give consent without knowing that we give consent that they can use our data. So we are currently with the data collection. That is quite a big effort. We're using a lot of the Reserve Bank data from the national accounts and the whole quarterly bulletin, basically building a balance sheet for South Africa. And then also we're trying to do a transaction flow matrix, so trying to see if funding goes into the financial markets or into the non-financial sector, where does the money go, and how does that impact the cost of funding? So basically, this finance sector that Anton was talking about, that is what we're trying to develop for South Africa. So we're breaking it down into all the institutional sectors, bank, non-bank, the central bank, and then you've also got households and the rest of the world. So very data intensive, we're using time series data, and then so you also have these behavioral equations below this balance sheet that you are constructing for the South African economy. Just in terms of going forward, what we aim to do is we want to keep this model on an open source so that it can be accessible to everyone that would like to use it. The DBSA is maintaining or will maintain the model as well as the data. So, and there will be capacity building. So together with SA Tide, we are working on capacity building opportunities to ensure that this model is kept alive and used in the South African economy.
Thanks, Adele. Short and succinct and to the point. Heinrich?
All right. Hello, everyone. I'll give this some... There we go. So I lead the development of the next generation of CG models at UP, and it's been a fascinating, ongoing discussion we've had in this to see how different parts of different methodologies are coming together in these type of models, these hybrid models, models that allow for various types of behaviors that we didn't see 10, 15 years ago. In our own CG modeling, we are bringing in things like the financial sector. That's now there. We are bringing in effectively disequilibria through adjustment mechanisms, especially in the labor market that's so important to South Africa. And so it's important as a general comment to, when Bruno or Antoine talks here about these are things we are still working on or shortcomings, please don't think that picture is going to look the same in 5 years, right? These models, these methodologies are always evolving, they're always getting better, and hats off to, well, Bruno, I know you the longest, and I know you guys have been working on improving this model for the better part of, 15 odd years. And hats off to you guys for that continuing effort. And Antoine and your model, a relatively newcomer, you guys have already done a lot of outstanding work, so excellent. I'm not here to obviously criticize anything. It's a bit like what the Bible says about praying. You don't do it out here in the open. If we do talk nitty-gritties, we go in behind closed doors and we flesh it out there. So I'm gonna make a couple of comments that is in general to the world of macro modeling and policy modeling, and for those who are involved in either reviewing work, consuming work, these are then things you can have a look out for, and I'll try and rush through these in my 3 minutes available. So I think the first bit I wrote down was already very well covered. Models are storytelling devices, right? And we should view them as that relevant to the scenario they are talking about. So again, it's about usefulness over necessarily correctness. Of course, we do try and be as correct as we can at that stage, but as Mark said, we're always open to learning more, absorbing new data, etc. And so in the interim, knowing that we can never be perfect, what policymakers tend to care about is big or small, up or down. Those are the things we absolutely must get right, whilst we are always refining the details. That being said, methodology matters, right? For example, we see input-output models being used in certain pieces of work. That's okay. I'm not a big fan because of their shortcomings of not acknowledging resource constraints and price adjustments. But as long as we are aware of those, we can work with them, right? But methodology matters. We should not discourage that, at the expense of we just want to produce speedy results or whatever, right? Credibility must be a big consideration at all times. A couple of other notes I've made. As Bruno has alluded to, and we could see with Antoine's work, the greater the economy-wide links we start building into models, and as we connect them, it of course places a lot more pressure on the theoretical specification, the data requirements, getting the elasticities right when we start moving and substituting between, for example, energy sources, maintaining model flexibility. These are all important considerations, and it sort of then hops back to one of Bruno's last points is, to what extent do we want to integrate many models versus keeping them apart to perhaps help with the flexibility we have? So these are our general considerations. Something we always struggle to do, especially in forums like this with limited time, is, there's a big need to explain transmission mechanisms when we are presenting results. The problem is always with these big economy-wide models, they are so huge, we just often simply don't have the time. And so that is when we have to refer to when we publish our work, and that's why it's so important, and credit to the presenters where they were referencing the published versions of this work. But it's very important that in those references, we tell that story of how we get to our results, because that is important to break down this perception of these models are black boxes and we just sort of taking the results as they come. So something to look out for is try our best to keep working through those transmission mechanisms. I'm going to run out of time, I'm pretty sure. So the last point I'm sort of halfway through my list, is I want to make a comment on baselines, especially in the context of the energy transition that a lot of this symposium is about. South Africa has suffered tremendously in its ability to implement transition mechanisms because of low baseline growth, right? If we think of the carbon tax story and what Cecil was presenting, that we were working on this more than 10 years ago, the point I want to make is it's a lot easier to adjust to certain measures that's going to take us through a transition if there's a high level of baseline growth, a high level of employment growth. Because almost any policy of this nature will have a short-run impact on the economy. We're either going to lose jobs in a sector or an area, think in Mpumalanga with shutting down coal, etc., right? And the economy will need that bit of time to adjust. Now, if your baseline growth is zero, which we pretty much are, we are back in GDP per capita terms to where we were in 2006, when pretty much this whole debate began, right? Now, if we think of a baseline growth, think normal developing countries, 3, 4, 5, 6%, creating a lot of jobs every year. If you're now taking a slight knock relative to that baseline and implementing a particular policy that's going to help us adjust and grow through the transition, it makes it feasible, it makes it possible. And so what I'm saying here is policies, are often judged in the context of what happened, but we also have to consider the tide we are swimming in and the importance of the macroeconomy. And so it's very important now that we've worked our way through a decade of state capture and all the, going nowhere slowly. It's important now that we really step on the gas and create the space in the economy for these adjustments, which I think throughout this symposium we've heard is, there's no turning back now. We got to do this. It's happening. It's already happening. But the macroeconomy needs to do us some favors and create a bit of space, right? So that in the baseline we are generating growth. And that. Let me stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. The program director has told me that we need to end our conversation at 15:15 because the deputy minister is here with us, and we need to make sure we are still in the room to listen to him. So I just want to pose a very short question to Adele, and then I want to wrap up. Adele, you're in the DBSA, and the DBSA is a state-owned bank investing in long-term infrastructure. Investing in long-term infrastructure. Why is this useful to you?
This is useful because we are in the business of financing 10 years and longer. We need to understand how it will look in 10 years' time, making decisions now for then. And these models provide us that kind of outlook, and as that was mentioned earlier about the economic growth, where is the baseline? How are we going to see the future and make decisions that we need to understand what's going to happen in the future to make decisions now? And in terms of investment, very important, who's going to fund the just transition? Who is going to fund the net zero? Where is this money going to come from if we're already sitting with the public finances being under pressure? We need new innovative investment mechanisms. We need new pricing or collaborating of different products. We need the private sector to participate, and we need to be able to sell this to the people who's going to put their money behind it. And I think that's very important for us as DBSA. Just something else, just on the micro models. It's very important that these micro models get linked up to this macro model, because that's how we're going to know where the risks lie, whether it's flooding, drought, the impact on food security. That's really important. I think a lot of that came also from the presentations that we saw.
Okay, good. So one of the former governors of the Bank of England, when reflecting on the question, why did we not anticipate the global financial crisis? His answer was, because we were all working with the same models in an intellectual monoculture. And so we were unable to see the gaps. We were unable to see the 1,000-pound gorilla sitting in the corner of the room because it didn't appear in our models. And we didn't have a diversity of models engaging in conversation that allowed us to then start identifying gaps and addressing them. So what you have heard today is extremely important. It's unfortunate it's at the end of the second day. But if you join this conversation with Francois' presentations and his constant reference to a multiplicity of different models in conversation with each other in order to create a shared space of understanding, that's what needs to happen in these kinds of models. And what you've heard is really the cutting edge, not just within South Africa, but globally, of people at the front line of developing modeling tools that helps us to better understand the present and the possible trajectories into the future. I'm not a particular fan of future studies. I prefer to talk about the evolutionary potential of the present. What's happening in the dynamics of the present that give us clues into what should be emerging in the future. We should not think of futuring as a kind of impatience with the present as a burning platform that we want to get off as quickly as possible. We need to almost expand the present, interrogate it more closely, and identify the various evolutionary potentials of the future that these kinds of tools help us to explore. They're not the crystal ball that present us with certainty. They present us with frameworks and conversations for exploring possible futures. So thanks to all of you and your contributions to this discussion. Thank you.
Perhaps you just can continue the round of applause as they make their way off stage. Thank you very much to our panelists and the moderator. I'm certainly hoping my bubble's not going to be bust here. This is the first conference you've attended, right, since you've been appointed. But we're making history. We're making history. So I'm going to introduce somebody who is newly appointed on the 4th of July for the 7th administration as co-deputy minister for finance for the Republic of South Africa. Now, yesterday when we opened up DM, we said, when I did my welcome, I broke down the word climate, and I said, climate for me, C-L-I-M-A-T-E, if you listen carefully, change, likes, immediate movement, action, thoughts, and experience. And clearly you're moving super fast. You've just been appointed, barely 3 weeks, and here you are already working at conferences. Please give him a resounding applause. It's his first time being introduced like this on stage at a conference. DM Mr. Ashor Sarupen.
I'm very grateful for the step here because in Parliament I'm not the tallest. I was never the tallest MP in my term of office there as an ordinary MP, and I always had to arrange a little step. I realize I'm standing before all of you in your evening plans, so I'll try not to set the record for the longest political speech ever given. But as I've written my own remarks today, no promises. Anyway, as we conclude the second day of this climate symposium, I'm pleased that I get to share some of my reflections on some of the discussions I've witnessed. I think that this day has been a significant step forward in our journey towards strengthening the National Treasury's role in climate action and achieving climate justice goals. The discussions, at least the ones I've witnessed, have reinforced the imperative for a comprehensive approach to addressing the multifaceted challenges that are posed by climate change. And we all know that National Treasury's primary role is to manage our finances prudently and in a way that promotes transparency, accountability, and robust financial controls. And we also have to effectively manage risks. Integrating climate considerations into the economic framework is not just a strategic necessity anymore, but a moral obligation. The impact of climate change extends beyond the environment and poses significant economic and social challenges. Therefore, our response must be multifaceted and, yes, even built in models, addressing immediate needs while planning for long-term resilience. And today's sessions, to me, have highlighted the importance of a comprehensive approach to climate action. This symposium has explored disaster response, transitioning to low-carbon technologies, promoting renewable energy, and developing climate-resilient infrastructure, and that's only in 2 days. These measures are critical for safeguarding our environment, promoting social equity, and ensuring economic resilience. And by embracing climate action as a shared responsibility across the state and society, South Africa can lead the way in creating a sustainable and inclusive future. So I'm quite excited about applying my mind to National Treasury's core policy levers and combining that with the instruments for climate action. Because by mainstreaming climate action across national budgets, expenditures, and our macroeconomic policies, and our financing frameworks, we can create a strategic vision to address these risks effectively. And all of your inputs, and all of you, I promise, are much smarter than me, have been invaluable in identifying ways that we can start thinking about strengthening our response using these policy and fiscal tools. It's through these mechanisms that we can embed climate considerations into how we manage our financial and economic systems. And so I'm going to take comprehensive notes back to Treasury about disaster financing, carbon tax, mitigation, adaptation, and addressing loss and damage. And the exploration of carbon tax, and I just must caution, I'm not pronouncing on policy here. Only the Minister of Finance can introduce tax policy, so that's a constitutional imperative. But the exploration of carbon tax as a mitigation tool, along with its economic and social implications, is essential to move towards a lower carbon economy. And I think these discussions have provided us with a nuanced understanding of how this can be a powerful lever in reducing emissions while ensuring that the economic burden is distributed fairly. So strategies for adaptation and addressing loss and damage were a good focal point in today's discussions as well. And it certainly is something that we will apply our minds to further. One of the significant proposals that I believe was discussed today was the development of the climate budgets tagging system. And by improving transparency in public climate flows, we can ensure that our financial commitments do align with climate goals. Learning from international experience and refining the climate budget tagging framework will enable the state to institutionalize this practice effectively, ensuring a just transition and improving social outcomes. These discussions have also touched on the systemic risks of climate change, carbon pricing, and of course, the carbon border adjustment mechanisms, with apologies to my colleagues at DTI for stealing this as a treasury note, but the growth of carbon credit markets and the establishment of new investors, financial products, technological platforms, and service providers mean that this is an opportunity and not just a challenge. And initiatives aimed at promoting standardization, transparency, market growth, and corporate action integrity are essential to ensure that these markets function effectively and contribute to our climate goals. And now, to conclude, a very brief speech for a politician. As I close today's session, I'm filled with a fair amount of optimism and determination. I think that this collaboration, the expertise in this room, and the commitment that I saw displayed here today is inspiring. And as we chart a course towards a sustainable and resilient future for South Africa, let's build on today's discussions, turning them into insights and then into actions, and let's turn these challenges into opportunities. Thank you all for your engagement, for your hard work in putting these presentations and discussion documents together. I look forward to further collaboration with yourselves and National Treasury in the days and months ahead. I thank you.
You're awesome. Sticks to his word. So that brings us to a close for today. We wish you all a safe drive home for this afternoon, and we will see you back here again tomorrow, but this time at 9 o'clock. Does it sound a little better? It sounds a bit better, right? See you tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Good night, everybody. Bye.